how do you use genetic testing to help a person fine tune their diet?
Diet is one of the variables we have a lot of control over and has a lot of influence in how our genes express. So it's really worth paying attention to. Is it more important than sleep? I don't know. That's a worthy debate. I'm not sure I'd put my money on that. Is diet more important to emphasize than proper, balanced, fully recoverable, varied exercise? I don't know. It depends. But diet's really, really important. And genetically, there's a couple things that people can do and focus on their diet. One is you can now genetically test if you are genetically more suited for keto, paleo, Mediterranean, high carb, or some shade of gray between those four. You can't now. This is another thing. Looking 25 years from now, what we've gotten wrong, except for some small pockets. Looking at the variation of the gene. Now, when I say variation, is it the air quotes good copy, the air quotes medium copy, or the air quotes bad copy? This is, there's the green, yellow, red designations. Green is you got the good copies. Yellow is you got one good, one bad, and then red is like you got two bad. By two, I mean one version from one version from dead. Like the recipe book. And if people have two bad copies, it's red. One good, one bad, yellow. Two good, it's green. Now, there's this idea that if I have the bad copy of the gene, therefore, it's super significant. That is true for a lot of genes, but not for all of them. Now, specifically, there's a gene for production of salivary amylase, like how well you break down carbohydrates in your mouth. The variation of that gene, whether it's a green, yellow, and red, doesn't really change the output of how much enzyme you put out, pure per cubic centimeter of your saliva. So it's like, imagine a fort. If your stomach is the fort and you've got the Visigoths, which are the carbs in this analogy, they're running towards to raid the fort. You got carbs charging your fort, charging your digestive system. You've got cannons lining your fort. These cannons are trying to mow down the carbs, so digest them. The variation of the gene is what version of cannon you have. Do you have the green version of the cannon, the yellow version of the cannon, or the red version of the cannon? For ease of numbers, we'll say the green version shoots like 100 things per hour. The yellow version is 95. The red is 90. So what's more important? The version of the cannon, 90, 95, or 100, or if you've got one cannon versus 15. So it's the number of cannons that matter way, way, way more than the version of the cannon. And this is what's called not called a copy variant. It's not the variant of it. It's the copy number. It's the number of duplicates of the gene. So when I go in, when my gene is like, okay, we're ready to release amylase, it will transcribe from all the duplicates of that gene all at once. So if I have one copy of this gene, I'm going to have one cannon firing at whatever rate. If I have 15 copies, I'm going to just all 15 are going to fire. So that's the three-dimensionality to genetics that very few people know about, much less understand or use.
That's what I'm thinking. Nobody talks about it.
Nobody.
Just like, here, buy this genetic test and find out what's broken. Be afraid. Not, hey, you might have 15 cannons that you don't even know about.
Exactly. So now that technology is available, and as of this recording, like literally been working for about a year to get a US lab to use this particular type of analysis for use within a practice. Like it has been, otherwise I've had to send them over. I've had to send all my swabs overseas. So we're very close at the time of this recording, like a couple weeks away, if that. So it's gonna be much easier to get these genetics, and it may be like there may be some interim period where you still have to send these things overseas. Then it's just a little time delay. But the thing about genetics, this is one other point about genetics that I love, as opposed to functional tests like stool tests and hormone tests and mitochondria, which I'll love and I'll do. But the thing about genetics is like you can invest in it like once, and genes are permanent. So if you can get your genetics results and you can like it is the highest value per dollar of any health test out there, because you can continue to learn and mine the benefits of that test for your entire lifetime. Now, going back to diet, there's figuring out what your carb tolerance is. Are you keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb? Now, for me, I was eating an organic, local farmers market diet. It was very Portlandia. I knew the names of my farmers and their chickens. So I was eating a Mediterranean style. But when I ran my genetics, I actually have the second lowest carb tolerance you can have. I have 2 cannons, just 2. And within 1 week of changing my diet, my energy crashes leveled out. I had this terrible gas that stopped, and I felt stronger. It was more sustained energy. And I also have clients of mine that are super high carb, and they try to do a more keto. I'm not keto. I'm more like a high, like a keto-ish version of paleo. People with one copy, they're pretty much keto. Um, I had a client of mine who was playing just amateur, not professional tennis, but amateur level, like high level tennis that wasn't professional. He got, he's super ripped, 6 something, like he's a specimen. He got keto shamed into doing keto by his buddies. That's a new term. Keto shaming. And it was like, dude, you got to be keto. What are you doing, man, bro? You got to be keto. Like, what are you doing? Like, what's the carbs are evil, evil, evil. So he got keto shamed, and he was telling me. Now, I hadn't told him what his results were of his test, and he was telling me before. I literally had the test ready to show him, and he said, "Yeah, man, I did keto. All my buddies were telling me to do it. And I was like fainting. I was feeling awful. I was feeling dizzy. I said, you can stop right there. Under no circumstances should you ever be keto based on your genetics." He had 13 copies. 13. He is super far away from things keto. And I said, and here's the genetics to prove it. You should stay as far away from keto as possible for you. And he was thunderstruck because he was, and he just stood there and was like, and then he said, "I knew it." That was the first words out of his mouth after that pause. "I knew it." And he just got so validated and also you can now take that back to his buddies and not say they were wrong and misguided. It's like, no, dude, I just have different genetics. If it's working for you, fantastic. But genetically, this is a no-go zone for me. So you can determine your carb tolerance. The other things you can determine genetically are 2 other aspects of diet. Number 1, what are your food triggers? What are your hardwired food triggers? So for some people, they have a genetic vulnerability to gluten where they are at the risk of celiac. Now, these people should not have gluten, period. And there's websites and listicles galore of what foods have gluten, what foods are contaminated with gluten, and what foods are what foods can have hidden gluten that's not labeled. Okay, then there's people who are lactose intolerant genetically. Now, we've got things like lactate and other whatever, but there's other allergens within milk like whey and caseins and other stuff that aren't tested for genetically, but some people can still be sensitive, even if they're a green dot in lactose, meaning they can digest down the lactose sugar. They still may be reactive to gluten from the other things. And not all dairy products have high lactose either. There's listicles of that, of like how much lactose is in it per dairy item. Then there's people, this is the fun one, who have coffee. People who are genetically sensitive to, quote, caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. Caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. I'm one of these people that genetically, if I have caffeine, I'm an anxious mess. And I don't care how bulletproof I make that coffee, how much coconut oil I shove in there, or cinnamon or clove or ashwagandha or whatever special sauce goes into it to make berberine, doesn't matter. Caffeine really messes me up. And I've lectured in front of a conference of 150 high-level entrepreneurs, and I tell them that at least 10% of you are genetically vulnerable to caffeine-induced anxiety and depression, you could hear the collective sphincter of the room clench. They were terrified that my company runs on coffee. What are you saying? And like, of course, there's solutions, obviously, but it was kind of my moment of the comedian in me was quietly enjoying watching everyone's transient level of panic, because coffee is such a staple. But there are solutions, obviously. If people like I figured them out, like how do you survive? How do you support your energy systems without the need for caffeine? Then there's the genetic vulnerability to salt, and that is normally associated with high blood pressure. Now, this I do not find clinically. What I find is water retention. That's what I find. I have some people have high blood pressure with like the ACE gene and the couple others that surround it. But like I have red dots all over my blood pressure genes, and at the time of this recording, my blood pressure is fine, and I have, it's fine. The issue that I see is, and again, genetics is about risks and about percentages and possibilities and probabilities. But what I find I see most often with people who've got the, air quotes, high blood pressure genes is they have water retention. And this happened with, and she gave me permission to talk about this, one of my interns. She was athletic, she's now the birds left the nest. She's on her own, having her own practice. I'm very proud of her. But when she was working for me, um, she's very athletic. She's very competitive. She perfect diet, master's in functional medicine, knows what she's doing, great lifestyle, still had this puffy weight around her waist and puffy fingers. And she's super competitive, hated it, couldn't figure out what to do. She ran her genetics, and turns out she was salt sensitive and histamine sensitive. And we'll talk about histamine just in a second. She dropped the amount of salts or changed it over to potassium salt. And then she also dropped the histamine in her food. And the weight, the puffiness in her fingers and belly went away. It wasn't calories she was retaining as weight, it was water. So salts, the salt you can retain water. Histamine, people are vulnerable to histamine, can also retain water. So histamine, for people that don't know, histamine is, back to evolutionary biology. Here we are. I'm always going to return back. Evolutionary biology. Histamine is the body's emergency flood switch. Histamine is the body's emergency flood switch. So what do I mean? It's the response to venom. So if a scorpion, a spider, a bee, a centipede, certain plants, other insects bite me and inject venom. What is venom? Venom is a concentrated protein. It's a toxin that can corrode or erode, poison, destroy tissue, veins, arteries, nerves, and certain snake venom can melt bone. So really bad, super bad. So if you get injected with poison, the solution to pollution is dilution. So you want an emergency switch to flood the place, to dilute the venom as quickly as possible. Now, can you overshoot and swell up and like choke off the arteries and nerves and that you're trying to preserve? Can you swell up your throat and obscure breathing? Yes, this is the trade-offs that we're doing. Can you swell enough to dilute the venom, but not too much that you choke out? This is the game that that evolutionary biology has to play over time. So histamine is the body's emergency flood switch. So if you are sensitive to histamine genetically, this is good if your genes evolved in a high venom environment. Just like if my high inflammatory genes are good in a highly violent environment in terms of recovery. So it's not, histamine's not good or bad, inflammation's not good or bad. It's, are you in the right environment to have it be an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage? So if you are sensitive to histamine and you eat high histamine foods, like, and this may get us canceled right away if I say this, like avocado, like like we're done. Like the podcast is over, Josh. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ruin it for you. Avocado has a downside. I know. Shocking. We're going to get trolled like no other. So if you have high histamine foods like leftovers, like fermented food, like sauerkraut has high histamine, all fermented foods, whether it's beer or sauerkraut, high histamine, aged meats, aged cheeses, whatever, like anything that's aged and fermented. There's a whole listicles of high histamine foods. You eat a high histamine food, you're sensitive to histamine. What have you done? You have basically introduced a slow moving, full body bee sting into your body, and now you will swell with water. That's what that is. High histamine equals water retention. And so you have that's why the waterway was around her belly, which is where most of her intestines are, as opposed to a little bit of esophagus in the throat. That's why her belly was swollen for the histamine.
With the histamine specifically for those genes, are they more concentrated in different ethnic groups? Because my mind goes to, the sauerkraut fermented food example, popular especially in Central Eastern European culture. They eat a lot of fermented cabbage, for example, or all the cultures that eat cheese. Are within those cultures, are there people who are eating those foods that have these genes that cause issues with histamine, or would it be much less likely there, but then more likely in some other ethnic group that doesn't eat that as much?
That's an excellent question. I know lactose is one of those genes that you can track population wise. The genes that have the copy numbers of the amylase genes, those track population, the people in higher agricultural societies that for over thousands of years, they tend to have higher levels of cannons, higher levels of copy numbers. With histamine, I would suspect that that's also true. I just haven't seen a population distribution yet. That'd be very interesting to see. I would also add the following. Histamine does not react in a vacuum. Your body has enzymes called dihistamine's, and those enzymes require nutrients like vitamin C and some other things to run and recycle and keep being robust, no different than the janitor of the mitochondria. If you have enough of the nutrients like manganese, that's what Mn and the Mn sod stands for, then your enzymes can keep up despite the free radicals or despite the histamine. So my question would be, one, is it that they just have lower histamine reactivity genetically? Or two, have they figured out knowingly or unknowingly to pair other foods in the same meal or in the same day or over the week that provide all the nutritional grunt to keep the enzymes going to break down the histamine that they're eating?
Dr. Sam Shay, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Josh.